Hello, Hana. How are you?
I am good. I am drinking my tea. How are you?
I am great. I am so excited to be talking to you today. Hana, you're an artist, a poet. You have an upcoming book. That's very exciting. And like, I guess from my perspective, um, where I see that you're gaining the most popularity is your affirmations on
Yeah,
Instagram. Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. And those are like, they're very, like, what I see about them is that they're these very, what some would consider very radical ideas, but rooted in such kindness and
Mhm.
such like loving affection. So can you speak a little bit more on that?
I started the affirmation series like 4 years ago,
Hmm.
I think in like March 2016. And the intention was always to create messages that were loving, that were compassionate, that were kind, but were also political. And I think in a lot of ways, kindness is political. Because I think like when you live in I mean, we're currently sort of in a period of like late stage capitalism, and everything is about dog eat dog, and you need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and everyone is just kind of in it for themselves. Especially like in the West, like individualism is kind of like the main sort of like philosophy or ideology that's promoted. You do everything for yourself. Nobody should get handouts, nobody should get charity, nobody should be sort of like uplifted. And so because of these really terrible philosophies, it makes kindness political. The reason that movements like Black Lives Matter exist is because our society right now literally doesn't value all human life the same. So you see it in all these different political movements that like the tenets of what they're doing are very simple. It's that all human life is worthy and should be protected. And yet people find it to be this like very radical political stance for you to even believe or say something like that. So I try to root my affirmation artwork in that idea that kindness is political, that it's important, and that every life is worthy.
On the topic of just your identity as a South Asian and how that comes in your work, I'd like to like widen the lens on that a bit and kind of
Yeah.
talk about what your journey was like when you started off navigating this, and how you came to these conclusions and why this started to be so important to you.
So naturally, like most South Asians, I didn't go to school for art or like wasn't really told to pursue that because we don't really, our parents like don't really want us to pursue these kinds of like creative and precarious careers. Um, so I think like when I started making art, I already felt like it was a form of resistance because I felt like I was already pushing back against certain norms in our community of what is an acceptable job or an acceptable life path for like a woman to undertake. Um, and so when you're already doing that work that's considered resistance, you might as well just go like dive right into it.
Yeah.
And I obviously went through a period of self-hate, like growing up. I feel like any brown kid that grows up in the West goes through that, where you literally want to be white and you like hate yourself. Um, but I eventually grew out of that, and then I started questioning my family over things like why are certain things like, even just like in terms of like queer and trans issues, like you're sort of told to keep these things private because coming out and being public about them is like a Gora thing. And like that's really screwed up because brown people, we have queer and trans ancestors. Queerness exists in our communities. So why are we being told that it's a white thing? And I think the reason that our community has become so defensive of certain outdated notions is because we don't want to end up just completely assimilated and losing ourselves in the West. Like we don't want to become white people. We still want to uphold our faiths, our traditions, our cultures, our ancestries, our heritage. But I find sometimes like that pressing need to keep that stuff safe and thriving comes out in a really toxic way. And it's usually just pushing your kids down, stopping their questions, not allowing any kind of like deviation from the norms. And I've sort of had conversations with people in our community being like, hey, cultures evolve. That's okay for cultures to evolve. It's okay for some things to change.
When I talk to a lot of South Asian artists, and even my work personally is very much rooted in traditional South Asian visuals.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case with you.
Yeah.
The content of it is very topical in South Asian cultures, but as far as your visual style goes, it's
Yeah.
much more experimental. It's much of a broader range. So I'd like to talk about like what what your inspirations were, where like what parts of the South Asian tradition you want to hold on to, what made you decide to like move away from that. So yeah, I'd like to hear about that.
There's a couple of different things. So for one, I love Muggle art. Like, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I have tried to make it, and I really suck at it. Like, I've personally experimented just by myself, and I suck at it. So I'm like, okay, that's not meant to be. It's not meant to be that I'm making like Muggle art. But I think like when I first started drawing, I learned a lot of like my style, or I guess took inspiration from a lot of underground comics. Like, especially like when I first started drawing, I was like really into this like weird, like hyper detailed, like almost like grotesque sort of look. Because I was seeing that in a lot of the comics that I really liked. And then I kind of like started to build from there. But then when I started the Affirmation art series, like I realized like a lot of the work that I was doing before, it was like kind of painful to look at. And it was like intentionally painful to look at.
Yes.
Like I imbued this sort of like ugliness into it, and I wanted it to be ugly. Like it had a political purpose. But I also found like a part of myself sort of aching for something soothing. When I started getting like bigger on Instagram and I started seeing other brown artists, I felt kind of like sad or like excluded in a way, because I felt like there were all these brown artists that like knew each other and were connected with each other, and I felt really like on the outskirts of that. And I kind of felt like there was this expectation that because I was a brown artist, I should be making like brown art. And I kind of started to like resent this expectation, because I was like, well, I am making brown art because I'm brown. Like, I shouldn't have to like slap a bindi on it in order for it to be seen as brown girl art. Like, I think people also forget that South Asia is one of the most diverse places in the world. Like, we look at Canada and America as a melting pot, or a salad. I don't know, what do people call it? There's like a one that's called like a multicultural salad or some shit. But like those, like the diversity here is like nothing compared to the diversity in South Asia. Like in India alone, the amount of languages and groups that are there, it's intense. And people don't see that as diversity because it's all people with brown skin. But it is diverse. So you find all different kinds of art even coming out of there.
When you start thinking outside of like, okay, what is considered mainstream brown art, which is usually very like tokenizing, very like, that same like white gazy mindset. When you
Yeah.
start to think out of that, there's so much room for experimenting, so much room for like thinking about what you want to hold on to, what you want to let go of, and what like creating like a visual language that is yours as
Yeah.
a South Asian person, and not necessarily as as a as a white person that considers you a South Asian artist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I never like found myself even drawn to like certain types of like South Asian art styles, or like what people think South Asian art styles should be, because My family background is very complicated. Like, I'm Indo-Iranian, and my family is from a lot of different countries and settled in a lot of different countries. My grandmother's family was there when the Shah of Iran like outlawed the chador. And then my grandfather was there in India during partition. Like, we've been in so many different places at so many intense points in history that we ourselves are such an amalgamation of so many different things. So I'm never gonna like, create as a monolith, because like we are not a monolithic people,
I wanted to talk about your upcoming book.
Yeah.
Yeah, super exciting. This is your second one. I have
Right.
the first one right here.
Woo!
Was it upside down? Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, flipping through it, I see, I see what you were talking about, like the grotesque
Mm-hmm.
visual style, the ugliness,
Mm-hmm.
that is like, it's hard to look at, and I'm sure even harder to, it takes a lot of energy to draw.
It's
So,
great, yeah.
um,
I really wanted that style in that book. Like,
yeah,
I wanted that style represented in some way,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
so how is, what's your new book gonna be about? How is it different from the second
um,
book?
so it's pretty different. I A lot of people like express interest in like wanting a book that had my affirmations in it,
Hmm.
because it is such a popular series, and I've made like over 200 of them now. Um, so people were like, "Oh, put out like a coffee table book of all your affirmation work." And like that never really felt right to me, because like I am a writer and I went to school for writing. Um, and I was like, there's so much more to say though. Like, I can't just have them stand alone if I'm going to put out a book. That's not what I do. So, it's a collection of essays. Um, because I like essay writing was kind of what I used to do when I was still in journalism. Um, so it's a collection of essays, and I've picked some of my favorite affirmation pieces. So it's about 50 affirmation pieces in the book, and then it's accompanied by essays. And they range from like a lot of different topics. Like, obviously there's very much an emphasis on like mental health and body positivity, but it also broaches like very like intense political subjects. Like, I do talk about climate justice, and I do talk about reproductive rights, and I um, talk about like, some of the controversies that have happened like in Canada over like niqab, like the niqab ban and things like that. Some of the like a lot of the essays are like really humorous, because obviously they are personal essays, and I talk a lot about like stupid shit that I've like done in my life. But I also wanted to make it really light and funny. Like, I didn't want to create trauma porn. Like, I just didn't want that. I'm not saying that anytime you write about trauma, it's trauma porn. I think it's really important for marginalized people to write about their traumas and to write about what they've been through. But I feel like every time a racialized person like writes a book, there's like an expectation that we have to talk about like really heavy things. We're very mundane and silly, and it's okay for racialized people to have mundane, silly stories. Like, fun coming of age narratives shouldn't just be a white people thing. We also have coming of age stories, and some of them are really funny and silly. Our lives have joy in it. And I think it's important for racialized people to read stories of other racialized people being happy and having funny stories. Like, so I really wanted to stray away from talking about traumatic things. I did not want to delve into any personal traumatic experiences.
Doesn't necessarily have to mean showing yourself to the entire world.
Mm.
It's like, and we think like when we hear vulnerability now, that it's like, oh, I need to like open my
Yeah,
heart, and like everything that comes out, I want everyone to
exactly.
hear it.
Like, I'm vulnerable to my friends. I'm learning to be vulnerable with my friends. I wasn't always. I was very closed off, and I'm learning to be very vulnerable with my friends. But no, I don't necessarily want to bear every detail of my life to strangers that may hurt me. And it's okay for me to set boundaries. Like, unfortunately, I think so many racialized artists have fallen into a trap where no one has told them that their safety is number one. Like, I know a lot of queer South Asian artists who feel a sadness about not having to be out. And I say out because I also think the outness in the closet is also a Western construct that wasn't really made for our cultures in mind, because outness is difficult for us. And I know a lot of South Asian artists who are struggling with this pain and feeling like, oh, I need to be out in order for people to like take me seriously as like a queer artist. And then they put themselves in positions of huge danger. And so I often tell people, like, if outing yourself means that you're going to be kicked out of your family's home or they're going to hurt you, you don't need to be out. It's okay. If you want to wait until you're independent and you're away from them, that's okay. It doesn't make you less queer. And so there's like this expectation, like, I get that that's what a lot of people in white homes do. And I'm not saying white homes don't have homophobia and transphobia. But like, I think like we take our out narratives from white people when we're here. We see it like from white people, and then we don't like think about our safety and how it might be different for us. Like, we think about vulnerability so much in the context of social media. Vulnerability also is important in just your interpersonal relationships. Social media is not everything. And social media is a dangerous, dangerous place.
I wanted to talk about what being a successful artist means to you outside of these outside of the bounds of like white accolades and recognition and things like that. So like, as far as your personal definition of success, what does that mean to you, and how did you come to that conclusion that this is what will make me feel successful or good about myself?
I find that my success doesn't fit white standards or brown standards.
Okay.
So the white sort of measure of artistic success is like, you go to a prestigious art school, you get accepted into galleries, like they have their own structure. I didn't go to art school. I don't have connections with like, big galleries. I've never done fancy art shit, basically. Like, I didn't go that traditional route. Like, most of like a lot of the white people, I live in Toronto, and a lot of the white people here who are like the cool artsy white people, like they all went to OCAD, which is the local arts university, and it's very very well known arts institution in Canada. And like, I didn't follow that path, and I've had a lot of people assume that I went there. It was really funny. They'll be like, "When did you graduate from OCAD?" And I'm like, "No, I went to Ryerson for journalism." And then the brown measure of success is prestige and money. Being able to show that you made a lot of money, that you have a great salary, because our parents bring us here so that we can have a lot. They don't bring us here to live so that we can live paycheck to paycheck. They bring us here with the intention that we will always have more than them, that we will be prestigious, that we'll have a title, an organization that we're a part of. So not freelance. Freelance is not the brown definition of success. Okay, you have an organization, you have a title, you have a salary. I am a freelance artist who works in a gift shop and lives in a box. His apartment is small. But I don't measure my success by any of these things. Do I want more? Yes. I'm underpaid as an artist, and I do want more money, and I deserve more money. But my success, I think I've come to the realization in the past couple of years, after being disappointed in my career trajectory, that my success can only be measured in the impact that I have on people.
What's the drop date for your book?
It is September 22nd. The book is available on a lot of different websites, but you're in America, so I'm going to say Barnes & Noble carries it. And Indigo, which is Canadian, also carries it, but they do ship international. And of course, my publisher, Book Hug Press, carries it. And yeah.
Yeah. And it's called
Small, Broke, and Kind of Dirty.
I love it. I love it. And
Okay,
I think
that's
it speaks so much
deep.
to the things about success that we were just talking about, which
Yeah.
is wonderful. Wonderful.
It's the mascot for the book is an opossum. That's what
Amazing.
I decided.
Amazing.
Because they're small and they're broke and they're filthy. So yeah.
All right. Well, it was amazing talking to you. Thank you so much.